Get out of here. That's supposed to get out of here by now. Hi. It is the second season. We're going to kick off the second season of Effluvium with a wonderful guest, Barbara Herman. And I'm also going to turn down this music here because it's competing for attention. It's very bossy music here. Fugachi. There we go. This is what happens when you're the host and the producer and the director for a live stream. So, yes, we have Barbara Herman of Eris Parfums. You may also know her from this book here, Scent and Subversion, Decoding a Century of Provocative Perfume. And a little bit later, Rachel and I are going to discuss some of her picks from this book. And also from this wonderful blog, Yesterday's Perfume, for which I have referred to as a reference for quite a long time before becoming acquainted with Barbara. Everything sort of connected together, and I realized who was who, and my mind was blown. And we're just going to have a great time here. I'm sure Rachel's going to be my co-host as usual. And we're going to learn a little bit about the brand. And we're also going to discuss a most recent release here, which I find to be fantastic, Delta of Venus. And I'm also going to ask a couple questions about this beauty, which I will be reviewing on, of all things, Vanilla Scents Week. Although that would be up for debate for some people. This is mixed with 3 X's, which is one of my new favorites. So wonderful stuff. All right. So in a moment, we're going to have Rachel joining us. I'm just going to take a look at the chat here and see who has dropped by. Hello, Paroli. Good to see you. And Pat Lester, great to have you here as well. And it looks like I need to send Rachel the link here so she can join me in a couple minutes. Why don't I take care of that? Hi, Line on Beauty. Wonderful to see you as well. And Alex of Perfume Temple. All right, just bear with me, folks, while I send some very important information to my good friend and co-host, Rachel. And while I'm doing this, if anybody wants to share their scent of the day, their new discoveries, or just some observations, or some questions that you might have to ask Barbara during the stream, just shoot them on over while I shoot over the StreamYard link so Rachel can join me. Let's give me 1 second while I bring this up. All right, I have the link here, and Rachel is going to be coming in just a minute. And we're good. Okay. All right, let's see here. Okay. Right, we have 9 people who are tuned in at the moment. Thanks for joining us. And a Line on Beauty. Wearing vintage Amazon. Very nice. I am partial to Amazon. A lot of folks are quite a fan of Kalesh, but Amazon is more overlooked. Some beautiful qualities to it. And Rachel's here. Okay, Rachel's come to save the day. Hello.
Hi. It's great to see you.
Great to see you too. We have some peppy music that's playing ad infinitum here. I'm going to take that loop off. I really wish that StreamYard had it defaulting on not a loop, so I don't have to take it off of a loop. But you win some, you lose some. So wonderful to see you. It's been at least a couple of months.
Yeah. How's your summer been?
Not bad. Not bad. A very rainy summer here in New England. And it's been rainy in many different parts of the country, many parts of the world, actually. How has your summer been?
Really wonderful. We travel. We've been getting back into the swing of school, and now I'm ready for fall to come.
Yeah, I'm ready for it as well. We had some relatively hot weather for early September here in Massachusetts, and I'm ready for those cooler breezes to come through and the foliage and all of that wonderful autumnal activities to enjoy. It's my favorite time of year, between that and springtime. So yeah, the time is now 1:06 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're just going to give the opportunity for some more folks to tune on in, and then we'll get started here. So yes, we're also, after we have a discussion with Barbara, we're just going to go over a few of our selections that Barbara inspired us to purchase and to explore. So we'll be doing that after Barbara departs from the live stream for the remaining time of the stream. The stream's going to run until about 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we have 10 people tuned in at the moment. We're just going to go back to the chat. Just another. Okay. All right. And then we have some scents of the day. Mousse Cartier Pour Homme. Such a beautiful scent. William Bishara. Acqua di Parma Assoluta. And we have Thomas Adams saying hello. Wonderful. Okay. All right. Well, I think we will bring in our guest. She's been waiting in the green room long enough. Everybody welcome Barbara Herman.
Hello.
Hi.
Nice to finally talk to you.
Yeah, same. This is wonderful.
It's strange to know people on Instagram and then actually see them and hear them. So
that's true. It's sort of, I think our brains sort of process people as avatars. Yeah. And we have to remind ourselves, like, these are real people. And then when we interact with those real people, it's like, it just changes everything. It's great to have this kind of meaningful. I think this is more meaningful communication. So this is wonderful. I'm glad that you were willing to join us for Effluvium.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I wanted to ask you first off about your journey from perfume enthusiast, collector, blogger, to developing your own brand. Can you just tell us that journey?
Yeah, I say this when people ask the question, that it was very organic. None of it was planned, not even the perfume collecting. And it was really just one of those things where one thing led to another, and vintage perfume was kind of the gateway into really paying attention to perfume, falling in love with it, realizing that there was a lot to think about and say about it, write about it. But yeah, so I just, as you know, I started the blog Yesterday's Perfume like in 2008, around there. And, within a couple months, I knew, wow, there's so much more that I want to say than what I'm saying in these discrete posts. Even though I spent a lot of time on each one, and I felt like there was sort of a bigger story about, how scents were reflecting the culture from decade to decade. And, once I started collecting vintage ads as well, those things were in conversation with the perfumes. So I just was like, you know what, I want to write a book about this, and I think there's a book there. So I shopped it around, and it took a while because, it's a hard sell. Hey, I have this book about vintage perfume. So I really had to figure out how to describe the project. And eventually it did get picked up, and wrote the book. I didn't want it to just only focus on the past. So I had a chapter at the end where I interviewed people I considered scent visionaries, and Antoine Lee, who is now the perfumer for all of the Eris scents, was one of them, because I just thought he was doing something so creative and fascinating, and particularly through his fragrance Sécrétion Magnifique. And so I interviewed him, and then, it was probably a year later that I started thinking about, at least a year, maybe 2 years, that I thought, you know what, it would be really cool to start a brand. And I wonder if this guy who likes, to do independent perfumes would work on it with me. And he said yes. So it really was not a planned thing, but once I made the decision, once I make decisions, I kind of go all in. So I just made it happen, even though there were a lot of obstacles.
So you already answered my question of how things transpired with your partnering with Antoine Lee. How did you feel that he was a good fit for your vision? Was it the Sélection Magnifique that really took your attention, or just his?
No, I mean, I just like his style. I think it's very daring, but daring for a purpose. Like, it's not just for shock value.
Right.
Taste in what direction he, I mean, obviously he worked with brands and they gave him the direction, but where he went with it always felt to me so lush and beautiful. And, even when it was crazy, like Sélection Magnifique, there was an elegance to it. So I think that's like such a rare combination, to have somebody who can create something really beautiful and daring at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I did want the brand to sort of have the best of what I had encountered in vintage perfume, which was singularity, intensity, quality ingredients, story, all of that. And, I mean, I think if somebody can turn that Sélection Magnifique brief into something that, okay, yes, not most people will want to wear, but that is so fascinating and interesting that he could do anything. And I'm beginning to think he really could do anything. After this last one, where he literally just created a guava accord after having never smelled a guava before.
And that is really impressive. And just from experiencing some of it, it's astounding how accurate those certain aspects of guava that are almost like over ripened and sulfurous and over the edge, that I just kind of love about the flavor and the scent of it. I think we chatted about it a little bit at one point.
Being able to create that accord, but then being able to shape it to go in the direction that I wanted it to go in. Because, these stories kind of gather around the perfume as they're being developed. It's really not a linear process. And, after I smelled that guava accord and was thinking about the Garden of Eden and thinking about Eve, hanging out with the snake and reclaiming the garden, I really wanted that kind of green, bitter, slightly dangerous aspect. And so we started, I gave him pictures and told him the story, and that I wanted it to kind of be pushed in a green direction, because the guava that I initially smelled that he created was very sweet. And I mean, there's still sweet elements, but I think he managed to push it in the sort of green, slightly bitter direction that I gravitate towards, rather than sweet.
And I know that Rachel had a great question involving sort of, tell us a little bit about that, the question regarding the one that you shared, the first one, Rachel. I thought it was a brilliant question, if you don't mind, as I spray some of Delta Venus on here.
So, Barbara, one thing that I love about Eris is that it strikes me as a rare perfume house that is quite erudite, in that it's drawing on so many intellectual traditions, and there's so many cultural references in the names, even the name Eris, right? But at the same time, it's such a, the perfumes are beautiful, they're visceral. You don't have to know anything about any of the stories to enjoy them and to love them, but it does have all those layers that you can just kind of get lost in and keep digging, and it's so multidimensional. So I was wondering if you might talk a little bit about those stories, maybe even starting off with the name Eris, right? Because not everyone knows the Greek goddess Eris, and like why Eris, and where did that come from? And
So I had never heard of the name Eris before. I lived in New Orleans for a few years. That's where I decided I wanted to write the book. Like, I needed to be in a place that felt like it would be conducive to spending one's time sniffing perfume and writing about it, which is, a strange profession, I suppose. So of course, everybody knows about Mardi Gras and the crews that march, the different parades that march. And I had a bunch of friends who told me about this parade crew called Eris, that at the time was an anarchist parade. They didn't sign up for the proper permits. And I just remember hearing the name and thinking, oh, that's such a beautiful name. I wonder what it means. So I looked it up and found out, you know, this whole history that not only is Eris the Greek goddess of technically, you know, the Greek goddess of like war and chaos and strife, but, you know, this whole like philosophical group kind of emerged around this idea of, you know, anarchistic thinking and living and being free and all of that stuff. So it just seemed like a really beautiful and, I don't know, rich idea to, or icon to build a perfume brand around. Particularly since I'm a woman and started, you know, it's not a lot of times that you see women starting perfume brands. I mean, of course, there are a few and they're awesome, but I just really wanted it to have a powerful sort of name and image, and I thought that was so intriguing.
I love it. You know, it's so wonderful and just so ripe with so many meanings. Like, you know, I kind of think of like Eris as like throwing this apple of chaos into like the boring perfume counters, you know, all over the world and making something much more interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, the whole golden apple of discord is such a beautiful image and idea, and I'm actually going to be working with some people in London to create a little film precisely around this idea with the apple. Because I haven't really used that imagery much, but it is, like you said, in the background. So, yeah.
Awesome.
But I'm glad that you know, even though there are all these cultural references, I don't want it to feel like a pretentious brand that you have to get all of this stuff in order to appreciate the perfume. And I do think that Antoine's Perfumery is very visceral, so you don't even have to know the name or any of it, you know. I think that helps though. I mean, at least for me, I really love all of the stuff that gathers around perfume, the names, the ads, you know. I mean, you can get really cynical about the marketing around perfume, but I think it can be a really amazing sort of way of making the fantasy even more real somehow.
And that's the key word, fantasy, you know, the fantasy of luxury, the fantasy of glamour, you know, leaning into that, you know. And many individuals who would buy a lot of these fabulous perfumes, you know, throughout the, you know, last over a century, it was giving them allowance to kind of live that fantasy, maybe even if it wasn't necessarily accessible to them otherwise.
Exactly.
And I love those interpretations, those representations rather, through the advertising. And of course, we could deconstruct it. This is the age of deconstructing everything. But if we were to just look at it at face value and think about how it was a way for somebody to keep their imagination illuminated in adulthood. That's what I think is wonderful about perfume.
And I mean,
that ability.
You know, people talk a lot about the democratization of luxury, but I believe that perfume truly is that, you know. And especially when you look at the history of it, I was so intrigued by this idea that they used to sell those little nips of samples of luxury perfume in little vending machines that would be at the counter of a diner somewhere. Like, I just love that. And if anybody wants to give me some money to do that, like, that has been something I've been wanting to do for a long time, is to have Eris samples, maybe even cheaper than they are now, sold somewhere like in the hinterlands, you know. Like, I just love this idea of disseminating this luxury brand everywhere where anybody can get it at a price that they can afford it, you know.
Speaking of everyone, I'm a high school teacher and I run a fragrance club for teenagers who go to my school. So ages like 14 to 18-ish. And we sampled some of your fragrances, and my students were particularly drawn to Mix. And they had so many great things to say about it, and they loved all of them. But that was one that they really kind of congregated around. And they wanted me to ask you, if you don't mind, they said, well, So the name Mix, does that mean that the brand or the perfumer like supports LGBTQ plus rights? Is that
I
something
mean,
that's
of course.
part of the story? Because they were really impressed by that, and they said, "Well,
Yeah,
that's amazing because we don't see that in a lot of like mainstream advertisers. Someone being like
yeah.
boldly, supporting diversity, and we want more of that."
Well,
That's
there's a through line in everything I've ever done with perfume about LGBTQ, gender, parity, no matter what your gender is, or what you decide it is. And that's really between animalic fragrances and the ways that perfume helps subvert, binary gender. That's really why I wrote the book. I mean, these perfumes and the ads and all of the weird not weird, but subversive ideas that, hey, with perfume, you can get away with all this stuff that you might not be able to get away with in, a very restrictive culture, whether it's for women, whether it's for non-binary people, people who don't have money to buy perfume, but this is a perfume that they can have a touch of luxury and, fantasy in their life. Like all of those ways that perfume can be subversive. That's been my interest from the beginning. So I tell people often about Mix, like, even though I like to say, this is the first superfluid perfume on the market, I mean that as, it's the first perfume to explicitly say, in the name, this is a celebration of choosing to express your gender as you see it, as you define it. And I often like to parallel that with Charlie perfume from the 70s. I mean, you don't smell that and say, oh, this is a feminist perfume. No, you see the ads, you see Shelley Hack, walking down the street wearing this like nice pantsuit.
Yes.
She's just all over the city in these TV ads and in the ads in magazines. And her name is, kind of, I guess I realized later, like very gender amorphous. So that perfume was celebrating the feminist movement, and I wanted a perfume to celebrate the kind of inquiry into the rigid gender binaries that were really being called up and spoken about around 2014, 2015. And actually, at the time, I was a journalist, and I wrote an article about Mix, not the perfume, but the actual word, because it had entered the Oxford English Dictionary in 2015. And I interviewed, Mix, Vivian Bond, and I think I even knew about the honorific Mix through her. So yeah, it's definitely, without a doubt, that's part of that perfume and the story and the name and the celebration. And that's my favorite part of perfume, is being able to sort of be subversive, I guess. Beautiful, but also like challenging the status quo. That's a really long answer. Sorry.
No, it's a great answer. I like that you point out that time period where Charlie was sort of the culmination of it all as a release. That, when you look at the rise of first wave feminism, you're seeing the changes in so many things culturally, including perfume.
Yeah.
That as you get through you start to see in the mid 60s.
Mm-hmm.
You see how they're kind of shifting these tropes and elements in perfume until you reach that arc in the, like, as you say, like the early to mid 70s with these green chypres and more less flowery and more leathery and more woody and I just love that whole time period because
But at the same time, the leathery, tobacco-y, woody stuff was happening for women's perfume in the 20s and 30s and 40s too, which is so fascinating.
That's true, but then the 50s changed things because the 50s was such a weird cultural shift. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I'm not like contradicting what you're saying. It's just that
also very fascinating to examine, like, why was it safe in the 30s and 40s and 20s to have women smelling so quote unquote masculine, and then that was maybe a little bit more dangerous in the 50s, and you needed to put women back in their florally, flowery places. It's just, I mean, I don't have an answer for any of it. I think it's more like, oh, how interesting that perfume can reflect all of these contradictions and changes.
Right.
Not, in a very clear way, but in a legible way that we can analyze like we're doing now.
Right. I mean, we can get to through all different kinds of things like McCarthyism and the rise of like Christian fundamentalism. Like all these different things that just started to, to come together, post World War II. But I think that that to me is really fascinating as well. Like the context, of course we can talk a lot about how the perfume smells and how it's created and what the, the notes and the accords and, but just the historical context and how you see, the time through the timeline, these certain trends come and go that reflect the zeitgeist of the time. I just think that that's very cool. So I have a question for you. Speaking of mix with an extra X, which was my most recent acquisition.
It's triple X. Mix
triple
X.
So how would we say this mix versus the other mix? Would we say
and mix triple X?
So mix triple X. Okay. Love it.
I mean, how would you know that? Like
I was trying to say mix. You draw it out.
Everybody has their own way.
Yeah, true. So Christopher Kemp of Floating Gold is quoted as saying that this was the one ambergris perfume that came closest to the real thing. And that is what got my attention, because I recently read that book and I was all about, experiencing fragrances that have certain amounts of ambergris. This has 7% ambergris tincture in it, which is impressive and uncommon in today's perfumery. I think it's been uncommon in any time period, maybe in the last maybe 50 years at least. So tell us a little bit about how this, I don't want to call it a flanker or a spin-off, or how this came into being.
It's interesting because it's a flanker, but it's really, the idea of it was the initial idea. So I was talking with some other folks in an interview a few days ago about how as Eris went along, I got a little bit more confident about being a creative director of my own brand, because that's not something you just immediately know how to do, especially when you're working with somebody like Antoine, who, before you were kind of like fangirling, and then suddenly like you're kind of asking him to do all of these things. And that took me a while to feel more comfortable with that. But all of that is to say that with the idea of mix, when he gave me the initial mods, my proclivity, of course, was to go to the most animalic one. And, he kind of put his like hat on the perfumer who had worked in the big, perfume houses for big brands and kind of helping to do a little bit of consulting. And he's like, look, Barbie, you've done some pretty big animalic fragrances in the first collection. Maybe we should tone this one down a little bit. And so that's where mix came from. And I was like, okay, sure, because I loved the like softer, like sort of more ambientness of mix. But then I couldn't ever forget the animalic one that I had kind of put to the side. So by the time Mix Triple X, came around, he was working in an independent lab in Annecy, France, l'Atelier Français des Matières, and they are the ones who have all of these like amazing raw materials that are super luxe and pretty rare, and they have their own special way of tincturing them and extracting things. And so by the time I was like, okay, I want to go back to that animalic mix and have this flanker, Anton was like, well, this is actually a great time to revisit this, because now I have ambergris, I have this gorgeous cacao that we can use instead of the boiling cacao. So just basically having the structure that was in mix and amping it up, and making it darker, making it more sensual. And that's where the triple X aspect of it comes in. It's mixed with the lights turned down.
Dim all the lights.
Yeah.
Just like Donna Summer saying.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's gorgeous. Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And that's synergy between the vanilla and the cacao and the ambergris.
Yeah.
And I have a small piece of ambergris. It's like a light gray ambergris from New Zealand that I've had for a while. And I have some perfume making background and did tinctures, so I know it as well. And ooh, what is that?
That's my lovely New York City buzzer. I'm just going to ignore it.
Okay. If it happens again, we know what it is the next time around. But just like Christopher Kemp, I recognized it immediately. And it is just that ineffable, indescribable kind of, your nose is trying to interpret it as something that is like it has as a reference point, but it just doesn't quite fall into any of them. That's the thing that's amazing about ambergris. Like the tobacco-y facets, the animalic, salty, saline, even rosy, like clary sagey. It's like all these different things going on.
Yeah.
And it just creates a sort of dimension and like vitality. It just feels living. It's just one of the most amazing materials.
I mean, when you smell it, the tincture, and I've been bringing that around to events, when you smell it, you can describe the scent. It is actually difficult because there's so much going on. But I think part of the reason why it's hard to describe is because it's the feeling of it that is actually working on you more than anything else. Like you're trying to pay attention to how it smells, but really what's happening is you're feeling something.
Yeah.
And, it's kind of like a combo of both of those things. And in Mixed Triple X, ambergris does what it does, especially a good ambergris. In this case, you can smell it a little bit, but it also like marries with your skin. It makes all of the other notes meld together, kind of glow a little bit. It's gorgeous. Ineffable is the word. It's really hard to explain what it is until you experience it.
And if you don't mind, real quick, Barbara, I had a couple of short questions. I was wondering, so you're kind of, I don't know if you want to call it second collection or the perfumes after your first collection. So are the materials sourced mostly from Remy Pouveret and
it's a combo. It's a combo.
Okay.
So Scorpio Rising and Mixed Triple X come from Remy's lab. And then the sort of greener ones, Green Spell and Delta Venus, are from Luca Maffei's lab in Milano.
Oh, wow.
Atelier Fragranza Milano. So,
that's amazing.
Yeah. So I guess that's sort of where, the fragrances get bifurcated, is that if they're sort of more sensual and dark and maybe more resiny and ambery, I guess, Remy's, that's his wheelhouse. And then when they're fresher and brighter and Antoine might need to work with a few more synthetics. That's where we work with AFM.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's fascinating. And
yeah.
Both
of them have such incredible ingredients. So I'm thrilled, and Antoine can work so closely with the labs there. I mean, I'm sure he did that when he was working, in the big perfume houses, but he didn't have as much say, and this is, great for him because he gets to really exercise his taste and expertise around what they're giving him.
And I think for luxury houses like yours, because when you have the freedom to access any luxury materials that you want, instead of being strictly, because of how the industry works, strictly limited to one warehouse and their production, you don't have as much artistic freedom. And so I think that really stands out with Eris, is you really feel like, wow, these materials
I hope so, because I mean, it's not like I've got money hanging off of trees, but the money part of it really, like the cost of the ingredients, is usually not part of how I make decisions about what we're going to work on. And Antoine's really good though at like being able to manage the cost so that it's not too crazy, but that's not really, it sounds so cheesy and cliche. Cost is not an issue, you know, but it really is not how I make my decisions about what we're going to come up with next.
Right.
And it's so different from the norm and the standard in the industry. You can tell just by sniffing that it's just such a difference, you know, that attitude and that making choices not based on the 1/8 of a penny here or there. I mean, it's thank you for making these. They're amazing.
Thank you.
They are. They really are. I think Rachel's right. You know, and a lot of, you know, and not to get into a cynical discussion, which can be easy to do, but on a lot of niche perfumes in the market, and we're seeing, you know, these houses popping up like weeds at this point. The intention is always sort of confusing, you know, not knowing exactly what the concept is, the intention, and then the perfumes themselves seem to be just as if they were, and I hate to say this because it sounds really cynical, they sometimes smell as though they are so strictly adhered to some sort of strange brief created by people in suits to, you know, really with money and you know, the profit margin being, you know, the first thing, you know, the first objective, which ends up meaning that, you know, a lot of these perfumes seem to open with something that seems very promising, but they collapse. And it's almost like I can't help but to feel that some of them, they do fill these gaps with more cost-effective materials because it means you can make more product and you can push more product, sell more product. So you're just not really getting that same kind of and quality, of course, is a debatable, you know, it's subjective, but to what I think is like the dedication and quality that we had seen in perfume in the past.
Well, and the thing is I don't think you always have to work with really expensive materials, right? But
true.
I think that there has to be a vision there, a direction. And it's interesting that you're saying sometimes you're not sure what these perfumes are doing. And of course, we're not talking about all of them, but a lot of them, like one might smell like the next, might smell like the next, and you're just kind of wondering what the justification is. Like, how is this different from anything, or adding to what kind of starts feeling like clutter after a while. And I think for us, we have smelled a lot of perfumes and we can kind of cut through that clutter. But I imagine somebody just getting into perfume, it must be like crazy overwhelming. Like, where do you even start, you know, because there are also so many people pushing like anything on them. You know, you don't know really who to pay attention to or what fragrances to start with. I think it would be overwhelming. I mean, I started getting into perfume at a time when, you know, you could just go to the mall and you'd have a good sense of what was on the market. Like, you know, I got into perfume as a teen in the 80s in Texas, and there were 2 perfume counters, the men's and the women's, and I would go to both, spray everything on, and I didn't really need to that was it. Now it's like, I can't even figure out how many perfumes are on the market. It's crazy. So yeah, it's a lot. I don't know how you even do it at this point.
I think that we've come from a market of relative scarcity where you knew what your options were and they were right in front of you. And like you said today, it's like, you don't even know where to begin. And that doesn't, I mean, of course you can apply that to anything, just going into like a supermarket. It's the same thing. So I think that, and then I think our animal brain, is not able to process so much of it all at once. So it's hard to navigate through it all.
Yeah. What was that book, like The Tyranny of Choice or something? You just become paralyzed by choice.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, to be honest with you, that's kind of why I started writing about vintage perfume instead of contemporary perfume. I was like, okay, this is a circumscribed area. And even though it's going to be more expensive to collect these, I'll feel kind of like I don't know. There's something contained about, I mean, of course, about the past. Like there's only a finite number of perfumes that came before, whereas
Right.
it feels like endless now. So that it was already kind of happening in 2008. And that's why I was just like, I'm going to keep this easy. And also it's the past, and I kind of want to understand those fragrances too. But that was part of the decision making. Too much on the market, even in 2008.
Yeah. And here we are 15 years later, and it seems to have exponentially grown.
Yeah.
And you look at websites like Fragrantica or Base Notes or what have you, and I get overwhelmed. I'm like,
I don't even know.
I can't
keep up with announcing every new fragrance, because I think there are more fragrances than people in the world at this point.
It feels like it. And then so many of them, and they seem like they've been made with a different intention that I would hope to find in a perfume, that I feel like, was this made with the purpose of making a profit? And that's it. Like that was the first thing that's in my, and even the idea of niche and how that's become diluted, and things that are niched don't really seem to be a niche anymore. It's like that, in the fragrance communities, people just refer to niche as something that doesn't have a designer label, which doesn't really make sense. It's just, it's interesting.
After, I mean, people make this analogy, but after sort of like Nirvana and all those folks came out of the Pacific Northwest, suddenly everybody was alternative music.
Right.
After a while, you're like, well, alternative to what?
To what? When it's on heavy rotation on Top 40 radio, how is that really an alternative anymore? And then what will replace that? And maybe we are starting to see the replacements for that coming through, but they really are from more independently minded, brands, whether they're brands who do enlist, a perfumer, or if they're independent perfumers themselves to kind of become that new niche. And I think we are seeing that, and there's some incredible stuff that's
yeah, for sure. I mean, that's the thing. I think you really, if you have a nose for it, you can sniff out who's just in it for a quick buck and who actually really loves perfume.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I think Eris is definitely one of those houses where like every single fragrance in Eris is interesting, has a great idea, an interesting idea, something you haven't necessarily seen before. And while you're here, Barbara, I really wanted to ask about Belle de Jour has this seaweed note. I'm in love with this fragrance. It seems to be doing something totally new with the idea of, the aquatics. There's the aquatics that everyone knows, but this is something that I don't even really consider that fragrance an aquatic, but it's doing something oceanic in a new way that's also floral. And it's also body, but it's, I don't know. I wonder if you might talk a little bit about this fragrance. And it
was part of that trio from the beginning. That was, the Beauty and the Beast collection. And each fragrance was going to sort of be an interpretation and juxtapose the floral with the animal. And, it was up to Antoine how he was going to interpret that. And so, I like to think of each one as having sort of an intensity of animalics. And Belle de Jour is the lightest, Night Flower is somewhere in the middle. Obviously, Ma Bête is the third. But I did not know that he was going to sort of interpret animalic in Belle de Jour as a kind of skin-like, oceanic, human animalic. And it was so interesting. I mean, that one was probably the biggest surprise for me because, I had, given him perfume briefs and whatnot and told him what ingredients I loved. And it was the first three were really loosey-goosey. He just kind of went for it. But I told him that I really loved the allspice pimento note. And so I was very surprised to find it not in a spicy fragrance, but in Belle de Jour. And then there's that seaweed note. So I like to joke that with Belle de Jour, it's kind of like that show Chopped, where the contestants have a basket that has like all these crazy ingredients and they're supposed to make something of it. But
Right.
if you do the reverse engineering of Belle de Jour, it seems like a chopped challenge. Like, okay, orange flower, incense. What is it? Is there cardamom in that? No, there's allspice, and there's what is the note at the top? Oh, yes, the other note that I really love, coriander. So
Mm-hmm.
coriander, orange flower, pimento, and seaweed. It's like, and yet somehow it is so gorgeous and milky, and I know that has that ambery quality to it. I just love it. It's so weird and beautiful.
So cool, and it's like when we think animalic, we don't necessarily think animalic of the sea, but the sea
Mm-hmm.
does have that animalic quality that is.
Yeah.
Some people interpret as you can interpret in kind of a sexual way too,
Yeah.
and like
A sexual way, but also like a
yeah,
sweaty skin way,
yeah,
like
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that fresh sweat smells.
yeah, and it has all that in it. It's just it's unbelievably interesting. I love it.
Yeah,
It's beautiful. Yeah.
I think a lot of perfumers have attempted to capture that, and I think it can pose a real challenge, especially with those materials that are more marine oriented. They do require a very light hand and very a lot of attention to care because they can be overdosed very quickly, and they can do some pretty unpleasant things.
Yeah.
And there have been some others on the market that it just kind of leans a little bit more into a territory. It's sort of like it goes beyond animalic and erotic to almost unpleasant. Yes.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
kind of like low tide-ish.
that's what I mean. I really love Belle de Jour because it kind of replicates those floral animalics that I like in the sense of like it's hiding some of the erotic elements.
Yeah.
You find them if you're looking for them or if you're suddenly taken by them over the day, but they don't punch you in the face.
Yeah.
It's very subtle and it's very chic, like Catherine Deneuve in Belle de Jour.
Yeah.
You saw her on the street, you wouldn't think she was selling herself,
right.
but something like that. Like it's a very elegant fragrance that wraps its eroticism in a very chic, YSL coat or something. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. So in working with Antoine, have there been any materials that he shared with you that you weren't familiar with that really captivated you during the process of working on any of the perfumes?
There have been a couple that I didn't like. I can't remember.
That would be cool to hear too. The ones that you didn't like.
I honestly cannot remember what they were, but there were a couple that he would suggest to put in this fragrance or that, and I just was like, I honestly can't remember what it was, but like too musty. I think there was something too musty or dusty, musty, dusty. I don't know what it was. It was some kind of it wasn't an animalic. It was a plant based.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one. It is actually kind of more of an animalic that is used to reconstruct ambergris accords called ambronol, and when you smell that undiluted, it smells like a really musty basement. It's like that's the first thing that came to mind to me. But there are a lot of natural materials that in their pure form, it's kind of puzzling how they really work into a perfume. Yeah.
So there have been times that he's gone maybe too far for me, but there are other times when he's reining me back from wanting something to be too amped up. So we both, rein the other in, I guess, depending on what the situation is.
Very nice. Very cool. So we currently have 22 people tuned in. If anybody tuned in has any questions, feel free to leave your question in the chat. What we can do here is take a brief intermission, and we will be right back. All right, back in a moment. All right, we are returning to session here. Thank you so much for your patience. We have a line on beauty. She has something for us here. Barbara mentioned she experienced a few obstacles in the beginning. What were they? And does she plan to write another book? What's next for Eris? Too many questions.
Obstacles. Let's see. I mean, money was a big one. Just big navigating the world of like, how do you choose and purchase and get bottles, and what's the regulatory stuff, and I mean, there was just a lot. But if you haven't done this, it's a pretty complicated world, and I was lucky enough to meet somebody who had navigated that for another brand, and she and I worked together for a bit. So that's one of the obstacles. I mean, it's an industry that was pretty rarefied, and they're kind of for mostly, rich people in the know in the past. So it's interesting thinking about the democratization of luxury. I think there is a bit of democratization of being able to start a business or having a brand these days because of all of the infrastructure that's available to us through the internet and all that. But that that it was mostly like access, money, like how do I do this? You have to get up to speed pretty quickly. In terms of if I'm going to write another book, I can't imagine. I mean, I would like to write a book. I don't know if it's going to be about perfuming. That book was kind of an obsession at a time, and I was really learning a lot about fragrance and kind of charting my journey, learning about it. So, all of that excitement that was there. I don't know if I have that, or like, I don't know what else I would say about it. I'm sure there's a lot to say about fragrance. I just don't know if I have anything else to say about it. But I would like to write again. I haven't written in a long time. I would like to write a book about something. And then what's next for Eris? I mean, I just launched Delta of Venus, so I'm taking a little break because I'm pretty exhausted. But still dreaming up ideas for the next fragrance, and I've added names to my Google Doc, so that's usually how it gets started.
Great. We have another one here from Chester Gibbs or Chester Gibbs. Chester, hi. Good to see you. Considering the amount of new perfume releases and the many new niche brands, I assume that is popping up, what would you say to young perfumers that may feel discouraged from creating fragrance?
I mean, I think if you have something to say in perfume, you should not let anybody discourage it. I mean, I would say this about anybody who wants to create anything. Just because there's a glut of crap, I mean, excuse my, French, doesn't mean that you shouldn't do something if you really feel passionate and feel like you have a vision and want to do it. I mean, that's the same with filmmaking or writing or anything. Like, you shouldn't, let the fact that there's a glut of junk out there keep you from realizing your vision. That's definitely not what, I hope that's not what the takeaway is when all of us are critiquing how many perfumes are out there.
Right. Yeah. It isn't so much. The quantity is more of a sort of a psychological conundrum, having to navigate through the quantity. But I don't think that there's too much out there. I think maybe there's too much of certain approaches, and what we need is a sort of a new crop of inspired and creative perfumers and visionaries, because that's the thing that's wonderful about perfume, is that there are endless combinations. There is new frontier, always is new frontier, because we have new developments in synthetics.
Yeah.
We are discovering that plant materials that had never been considered for perfume making are now being used.
Right.
And you're seeing that in a lot of them.
Yeah. But I think the idea of being trained somehow or studying it in a serious way is important, I think, to emphasize. Like, it's not that I don't think you can be self-taught or, I don't think you need to go to Ipsika or whatever to learn how to create perfume, but I do think I would want to disabuse people from this idea that it's something easy, because, the effects of mixing things together are unpredictable if you don't know what you're doing. And, I was talking in a previous interview about how, somebody asked me if I would have wanted to learn how to make perfume myself. And I mean, I said, maybe if I was much younger and had gotten obsessed early on, maybe that's something I would have done. But now it just seems like there would be too much to learn to be able to create the effects that I want, because I don't just want something to smell a certain way. I want, like, an emotional effect. And, the perfumer who really knows what they're doing is the perfumer who's going to be able to give that to me. And I think, I just think people should take it more seriously, that this is not just something to jump into. Like, there is serious training involved of whatever sort.
I think that some people approach it sort of like with that DIY spirit that maybe we saw in the late 70s and early 80s in punk music. It's easy, it's cheap, go and do it. Well, it's not easy, and it's certainly not cheap at all. And when you go and do it, you need a lot of time. I remember when I was first considering it in 2014, and within 6 months, I thought I was actually doing something that made sense to a consumer, and I was humbled by those who gave me feedback. And it was years and years. Like, it took me 6 or 7 years before I even really had a full fundamental understanding about how materials work with or against each other. It takes a lot of work, and there are a lot of people who are, they're ambitious and they want to get out there and they want to have a product and
well, and then the thing is going back to the question about obstacles, I don't think people who have not tried to create a brand understand how daunting the packaging is. Yeah. That aspect of it, and the regulatory stuff if you want to sell in Europe, and all of these sort of not very interesting parts of the business. You can't have a brand without that stuff. And some of that stuff takes up 85-90% of your time, effort, and money. So, I think to be realistic about what it's like to get into this biz, especially if you're trying to be a perfumer yourself, like, I would just, it's not to discourage people, but to have them be really realistic about what the challenges are, because they are, especially in a market that's flooded with perfume.
Right. Be ready for that level of dedication, commitment, and also the
mundane,
the stuff that's not fun. That's when I was like, I don't think I'm ready for this, because if it's helped me a great deal as an analyst and writer to know the materials, but that's one thing. Like, putting them together, that in itself is intellectually challenging. And then, as you said, the mundane aspects, the business aspect, the just filling of vials, and the amount of time and energy to do that and be a perfumer. I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. So you have to. Well,
if you don't see a lot of perfumers doing it, because I think they have seen the other side of it, and if they really want to create their own brand, they're like, yeah, that's okay. I'll just create really pretty things and let other people do that stuff. Because it is a lot. It's most of the time spent. I mean, if most of my time spent was just lying around, like, I'm not saying this about perfumers, I'm just talking about my part of it now, was sitting around dreaming up perfumes. My God, that would be the dreamiest profession ever. But that's like 5% of it. But all of that to say, if it's something you really love, like anything else, no one's going to stop you.
A famous YouTuber says, just put real animal bits in there and sell it to your friends. I think that's a little bit of a jab at some of the certain niche sector, but maybe, yeah. If that's the thing is, we have a right to do these things as long as we are following safety guidelines. But there is a market out there when you smell the stuff. I mean, some people enjoy it, some people don't. Sometimes when I smell this stuff, I don't really understand what's going on. It seems very amateurish. But my perspective is different because I've smelled so much. So I have I have this sort of framework on what to expect out of perfume. But, if somebody doesn't have that framework, then maybe they have an open mind that I don't. But yeah, it's kind of humorous, though. Pat Lester says, we can all acknowledge the brilliance of Antoine Lee's work, but would you ever consider working with a different perfumer in the near future?
I mean, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I think that's kind of where I am right now. I mean, maybe at some point there could be a collection with other perfumers, but, perfumers are not, developing that relationship and finding someone who works for you, it is like a relationship. And
Yeah.
I don't think I need to open the relationship right now, as they say. It's working fine.
Speaking of Antoine Lee, I'm sorry, Barbara, did I hear you correctly at the beginning? Did you say that he had never smelled guava and then he made the guava perfume? How is that possible?
It's possible because I shipped him some Mexican guavas and he studied them and constructed his version of what he smelled.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. That's why, stuff like that, like I could have never, if I had tried to, even if I had studied perfume for 10 years, I don't think I would be able to do that. And so, I mean, to him, I'm sure it wasn't easy, but it didn't take very long between my shipping him those and his sending me a mod of this amazing accord. It's incredible because, as JJ said, he does include all of the little sulfurous bits and funky stuff, and
like all the little esters and butyrates and all these weird things that tropical fruits are really challenging to put together. Unless you have a pre-made base. And for those who are aware, a pre-made base, you can't guarantee that pre-made base is going to be available for, indefinitely.
And I wanted him to keep not, all of the challenging parts of guava, but I like the challenging parts of guava. And I think it's those challenging parts that make people smell it and go, oh, wait, this really smells like a guava. Because if that was taken out and the sweetness or the candiness amped up, it would be like any other of the fruit fragrances on the market that cater towards teenagers or people who don't want challenging fragrances. So I wanted it to still have that kind of carnality that guava has, especially if it's a Garden of Eden story. It can't be a safe perfume that just smells fruity.
It's definitely not a Disney fruit. I call it Disney when it's sort of this very cartoonish, very sweet, sort of this fruitiness that, this is another thing about perfume marketing too. They'll give you like a notes pyramid. And of course you don't want to rely on the notes pyramid, but at the same time, you may feel a little perplexed because they'll have notes in the pyramid, but it smells kind of like a vaguely fruity concoction where you're not really experiencing the aspects of fruit that may not be candied and excessively sweet. And this is not a Disney guava. This is not a very pink, sweet guava. It has, like you said, like the green elements, the sort of those certain elements of fruit that I don't think are commonly captured in mainstream fruity fragrances, because there's this idea of what is pretty. And I love that fruit doesn't always necessarily smell pretty, even though it can smell beautiful.
It can smell pretty, but it can also smell interesting.
Interesting, yeah.
Interesting always has to be there for me.
Yeah, yeah. It's like what I say with gourmands too. I always say this with gourmands. I'm not one that really gets into gourmands unless there is this certain component to it that just reminds you this is not edible. You might almost be fooled into thinking it's edible, but there's this perfumistic quality that tells you like this is a perfume.
Yeah.
It could be like,
no, it's
you know,
interesting
yeah.
because someone earlier said they were wearing Cartier, and I'm not sure if I actually don't know what the Bourhomme Cartier smells like, or maybe I do. I just remember writing about Cartier, and it had that like vanilla and galbanum combo, which is so weird, but really worked, I thought. So that's an example, I think. Of
Love that.
But galbanum, everything a little bit weird and interesting. So maybe that's the common denominator of.
It's kind of like a little bit of like toxic, a little tiny poison, a little, maybe a little bitter medicine or something that just like it pulls something in a different direction. I love those, like Cartier and Obsession and what else? Moschino, the original Moschino, Crazy Kritzia. They all have that.
If you think about perfume working on parts of your mind too, like the amygdala or the primitive part of your mind, those like slightly dangerous elements are exciting. They're, you know, you're not just smelling it and getting lulled into comfort. Maybe like there is a little part of you that's like your primitive part of your brain that's feeling a little bit scared.
Yeah,
you know? And I mean, I love horror films and I love spicy food. I used to work at a marketing agency, and they kind of would do these psychographic analyses of different personalities, and I fit that, like, you know, well, I used to like roller coasters, I don't anymore, but roller coasters, dark bitter coffee, scotch, you know, horror films, and whatever I just said. But I feel like that's kind of like my style of perfumes that I like, is there always got to be a little something that makes me challenged, I guess.
Yeah. Or else like it's pleasant. I'll use words like, you know, in my reviews, like this is nice, this is pleasant, and it's sort of almost like my polite euphemisms for it's nice, it's pleasant, but it isn't really doing something that makes me feel a certain way and also think, because thinking and feeling together, that is some powerful stuff in any kind of work of art. Right. So you're, you know, to reflect on the experience.
And I think that, you know, that's always kind of been the way I experienced perfume, not as a kid, not as a kid, but as an adult, and especially when I got back into it. And, you know, I'm asked often like what I'm wearing these days, or if I don't, and I just really don't wear perfume. I only put it on when I want to smell it myself. And so I wonder, you know, I don't know. I'm sure there are a lot of people who love perfume who wear it for themselves only. And I feel like this doesn't get talked about enough, because I'm really the audience for the perfume. Like, if people around me like it, that's great, but I'm really never wearing perfume for other people, or very, very rarely am I doing that. So I think thinking about perfume like a book or a movie or a piece of music that you're putting on, I don't think that gets talked about enough. To me, that would be the only justification for having a bazillion perfumes in a collection.
Exactly.
Otherwise, what are you doing with all those perfumes?
Right.
Are you wearing them every other day? Like, I don't know. For me, having a lot of perfumes, I justify it because I do pull them off the shelf occasionally and smell them, but I don't wear them every day. And I certainly don't wear like 500 different perfumes every year. You know?
Right.
For other people, I mean.
I think that when it gets to the level for any kind of enthusiast where they have a large collection, they have a library, a museum, whatever they want to call it, it's more about, it's more about every aspect of it, not just smelling it. Of course, that's the best part of it, but having it there as a reference, having it there as a piece of history. It's just a matter of the individual, being sure to temper that and not to let that fly, get out of control, because like any kind of hobby, especially a hobby that, the collected object in question is, there's quantity, there's access, there's potency, the potency of the sensory experience and the novelty of it. Anything like that can turn into an addiction. But if you're keeping it under control, there's no wrong way to enjoy perfume. There's always these arguments like, why aren't the dents in your perfumes lower? Or, why do you you don't have enough, you have too many, you're not, you're not getting enough compliments. That's the saddest thing is, for somebody who's the new enthusiast. And I just saw it on Facebook. There was a post that came up in the feed, and it said, what fragrance of yours is the best compliment puller? And that's just alien to me, because I don't even, I mean,
I guess that's the classic reason people wear perfume.
Yeah.
I mean, so really, I feel like, people like me, I'm the one who has to explain why that's actually not why I wear perfume, because that does seem like the odder reason, right?
It does to society in general. Yeah.
Analyzing it and thinking about it like that, that actually does really kind of need some explanation. But
yeah, I think the certain passivity of it, which is fine, because we use so many other personal care, affect, like any kind of products in a more passive manner. Like this serves a utility.
Yeah,
we're looking for results, and then the average person may have 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I think, for a lot of people who become perfume enthusiasts, maybe one of the first chapters involves that, like, how many sprays do you spray on to get the attention of others and the compliments? And then over time, they either decide, well, I've reached a plateau and this is how I want to, this is the experience, this is a relationship I want with perfume. And then others, they kind of become, they become so enthusiastic and so like passionate about perfume that those things start to matter less and less. Yeah. It's still fascinating stuff, that just, the relationship that each of us have with this medium, and the fact that it has such an immediate connection to parts of our brain that elicit memories and sensations and take us to certain places that maybe, we wouldn't we wouldn't necessarily be able to be taken to with any other kind of medium, visually, music. It's a great topic. It is. Yeah. Do you ever, are you ever inspired to listen to a certain music through perfume, or do you ever make any comparisons between music and perfume?
I mean, I think the only music that makes me think about perfume, but that's probably because the musician has written about perfume, is Brian Eno. Because he has that beautiful essay on perfume, and an album called Neroli, and I think that he probably composes music the way people compose perfumes. I imagine. I just get that sense that there's a kind of diffuseness, an ambience to his music, obviously, that is very perfume-like. But for me, I think, weirdly enough, it's language and images that I'm more connected to with perfume.
Do you ever feel some sort of like a not necessarily synesthesia, but something sort of like you associate colors or images? Or
I definitely associate colors and images. I kind of wish I had synesthesia, but I don't think I do. But a lot of these perfumes arise from a name or words or a story. So it's almost like spell casting a little bit. Like the name will create a whole host of associations for me, and that like moves into the idea of what the perfume could be. That's usually how it starts. Delta of Venus did not start that way. It started with an ingredient, which is not usually how these perfumes start. So the name was a real struggle, but I think it all came together. It's funny, like the story and the name and all of the associations came together to me. Like when I read the perfume brief, even though I think most people are like, oh, this is a lot of stuff going on here. For me, it's like, that's perfume like, to sort of yoke together unrelated, seemingly unrelated things into a story. And it makes sense to me. I don't know if it makes sense to anybody else, but yeah, I mean, I guess as a writer, I'm going to more associate writing with perfume making than music or anything else.
I'm glad that you mentioned Brian Eno, because Brian Eno is one of my favorite musicians of all time. And I always thought it made perfect sense that his approach to music would appeal to me much the same way as scent and fragrance, because his attention to the nuances and the layers and the spaces in between, as sort of the forefather, as it were, of ambient music. And I became such a huge fan of ambient music. And
yeah, I feel like that's the closest to perfume in another medium.
Yeah.
I mean, except maybe poetry or certain films. I mean, there's so many analogs, I think.
Right.
It has to be lyric. It has to have that sort of compression of things going on in that medium, a compression in a way that feels unnatural, but that is very impactful.
A line on beauty says, I don't understand wearing perfume to please others. I'm actually the opposite. I wear what I want and worry I'll upset others with my perfume choices, if that makes any sense. I think that's somewhat relatable.
It makes a lot of sense if you like a lot of weird perfumes,
that
you'd worry what other people think. That is something that I do take into account. Like, I don't wear perfume for other people, but I do make sure that if I do, I don't want a lot of comments.
Yeah. And that's sometimes why I don't really feel the need to have to wear, just to spray a lot of it. Because to me, spraying a lot of it is usually with the intention of getting, the response from others, like other people noticing. And sometimes I just want it to be a very private experience, especially when it may be something like, Balenciaga Ladis, which I don't want to hear some, young person say, like, it smells like an old lady in here. So I'm just going to wear it on the top of my hand and just smell it for myself.
Well, how subversive is that? I would actually, I think it would be really cool.
It's happened.
To have somebody maybe describe what I'm wearing as like, you smell like an old man. I mean, obviously that would be more interesting than to be like, you smell like an old lady. But for you, like being described as smelling like I remember in my 20s, I had this boyfriend who wore his mother's fragrance, and I think she must have worn something from the 60s.
Yeah.
It was just so odd to smell this vintage perfume that was clearly made for a woman on, this like 20-something guy. And I thought it was so cool, but very weird. But he
love it.
So.
I'm wondering, Barbara, you were talking kind of at the beginning of the show about how scent is a reflection of today's culture. And I'm so curious because something that I adore about Eris is how you express animalics and use animalics so beautifully in your fragrances. And I feel like since the 90s, and honestly, in the West in general, for like a few hundred years, we've been really obsessed with the idea of cleanliness, the idea that to be clean, you really shouldn't have any scent, right? Which is odd in the history of the world. And especially, I feel like when people talk about office fragrances or work safe fragrances, et cetera. So I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how the more animalic notes in Eris perfumes, like how they represent today's culture, how they fit in today's culture. If you think the idea of being clean or office safe is way too overblown, if that's an ad thing, like how do you think that fits in today's world?
Well, I mean, it's hard to say because it's changed so much since I wrote the book. fragrances have definitely gotten dirtier and weirder and more challenging since Scent and Subversion came out. But I think the idea of something being challenging or sort of bodily is, it's very cyclical, actually. You know, there were times when people in, you know, France in the 1800s were wearing, like literally wearing animal secretions on them. And in the 70s, that was kind of a sort of resurgence of that in fragrances by Alyssa Ashley. I mean, there were fragrances called ambergris, civet, musk. And so I think it is cyclical. I think we are kind of back in that. I mean, just the fact that they're afraid, like that Gwyneth Paltrow of all people has a candle called "This Candle Smells Like My Vagina." I mean,
right? Yeah.
Yes, it's marketing, but it's also, you know, part of the zeitgeist that, hey, it's actually okay to have, I don't know, to be interested in our bodily odor.
Yeah.
So I think that it's coming around to that. I mean, it's interesting that, you know, Sécrétion Magnifique came out like what, in 2004, 2006, and it's only kind of like 2023 that the mainstream is catching up with this idea that you can get away with something like that, which to me kind of guts it of its interest. So I think, if anything, just to answer your question in a roundabout way, maybe Subversion is going to shift into another direction, because sorry, Gwyneth, but if Gwyneth is doing it, it's already over, you know? So Subversion have to mean something else after that.
It's kind of like the same way that she did that to, you know, holistic, natural, clean beauty with her goop. Sort of like when she took hold of that, and I think people thought that it jumped to the shark, as it were. But yeah. I mean, who could, you know, I often wonder, you know, if there would be a shift to more of a connection with the natural world in a way that humans haven't had in a long time, and how that might reflect in perfume.
Well, I mean,
that's,
to go back to your question, Rachel, I think the animalic in Eris function kind of more in that vein of like grounding the fragrances, and keeping them kind of either like natural or human, or connected to just something alive, and the feeling of, I mean, I said a while back that to me, animalic fragrances, they kind of add an element of feeling close to, it's an intimacy. The fragrances feel intimate. They connect you to the other notes. There's just something warm about them. And so for me, it's more of that kind of ineffable feeling of feeling connected to. Kind of coziness, but also, you know, eroticism, sensuality.
Right. And I think that's where sometimes perfumers and brands start to lose the script, is, you know, when they overload the animalics so that you lose the nuance.
It depends on what you're trying to do. Like if you are trying to make put your stake in the ground, this is my animalic fragrance, and you want it to roar, then that makes sense. I think with my bet that happened. And it could happen again with another Eris fragrance. It just depends.
I love
the inspiration. But for the others, I think it's more of a subtle kind of warmth added.
Yeah. Well, I think Mabette is a great balance in that respect, even though it is very animalic forward. I think there, you know, some houses, they've released their ideas of animalics, and they'll smell so literal that it's, you know, it literally may smell like urine or feces, and it's the wearability, quote unquote, because that's subjective, is in question, because there, to me, when I smell some of those, there isn't something to kind of counter it to, so it's not quite as literal.
It's about dosage too, for sure.
Dosage, yeah.
For me, animalics work better when they are kind of subliminal. I mean, you can still smell whatever it is, but it can't. For me, it's better when it doesn't overpower.
Yeah,
the fragrance.
It's like better when it shades it rather than being the entire shadow. Yeah. Well, Barbara, I want to thank you so much for accepting our invitation on Effluvium. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope that we can do this again soon.
Sure. I had a lot of fun talking to you.
So have we.
And finally
thank you so
getting
much.
to like see you guys.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, you take care. We're going to move on to the next topic here, and be well. All right. Bye now.
Bye.
That was great.
Oh my God, she's amazing. I was kind of nervous to talk to her because I'm like, she's so amazing. Oh my gosh.
She is.
She's so nice though. Oh my God.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, for folks who are tuned in, there's been a lot of celebration of vintages and perfumes from the past. And, she was one of her blog, Yesterday's Perfume, was one of the first introductions I had to a lot of the vintage perfumes that I grew to love and appreciate. And just the way that she articulates as well, on her blog in Scent and Subversion, just reeled me in. Like totally, she's really responsible for that enthusiasm, and she's in a way she's an OG on the internet for that. One of the OGs. A lot of those bloggers, we have a lot of YouTubers who champion vintages, but we have to give credit to people who have been blogging and writing about vintages for quite some time, and they were the ones that helped spur our interest and passion in it. And I just love Eris Parfums as well. I think it is one of the best perfume houses in existence right now. And I don't say that lightly because I've been just so thoroughly impressed with the releases. So it was an absolute pleasure to have her as a guest panelist this time around. So with the next part of our stream here, we're going to run for about another 30 minutes, and we're going to share some of our fragrances that Barbara had inspired us to look into through Scent and Subversion, Decoding the Century of Provocative Perfume. This is actually still available for purchase at the Eris Parfums website. The link is in the description. Also, keep in mind, folks, that the link is in the description for Eris Parfums and for the Yesterday's Perfume blog. So check that out as well. So Rachel, do you want to get started with us and share your first choice
Sure.
for this topic?
So there's a couple houses that this book, Scent and Subversion, really got me into just by reading about. And the one of them is YSL. So I have some YSLs out. I didn't really consider YSL really until I really started getting into Barbara Herman's book. And the other one is Weil, W-E-I-L. And the first just kind of bottle I grabbed is called Bamboo, which I guess is from 1934. And Barbara, she wrote, it's a woody oriental perfume with a beautiful lavender opening with rich balsamic dry down. It's akin to Taboo or Youth Dew, but without much sweetness. And unfortunately, I do not have the vintage. I had a little tiny sample of the vintage Bamboo, which I've used up long ago, but I do have I have 2 bottles actually of the modern version, which
yes
is still great. Like it's still a really good bottle of perfume, but it's it's nowhere near the vintage, of course. But so I will say the House of Weil, and I grabbed Bamboo because I had it out. I had it out on my counter, and anything by this house really is fantastic, and I really did come to know them through her.
Yeah, I've heard actually that the newer version of Bamboo is pretty nice as well. I mean, maybe some of the there goes my Delta Venus. I don't want that to break. That I have her, that people think that it was kind of stripped of its original qualities and stuff, but you know how that goes. It's sort of like, we have a choice. Would you rather it not exist at all, or would you rather, or have a version that at least still captures some of that spirit? And to me, that's what always my response, because we have a few things that we need to keep in mind as well, that not all of us can afford a vintage.
Yeah.
Not all less con. And to be able to have some of these that are still in production and still at an affordable price, it means that you can still experience it, as mostly, what it was intended to be. So I think that is actually a great choice. I guess I'll go with my selection first here. And this one is not the original vintage, because the original vintage is really rare and really difficult to find intact without it having turned. But I think I mentioned this to you, that I recently acquired this, and this is from Grossmith London, and it is a Fulnana.
Nice.
And Fulnana. So for those who are not familiar, Grossmith is a British perfumer based in London. But it is, their creations are much more closely linked to the approach of haute perfumery in France. So very French style. Fulnana is meant to represent the exotic flowers of India and the overall sort of exoticism and ambience. We know all that exoticism that was common in the early to mid 20th century. But this is a beautiful orange blossom and geranium in this, and almost this like mentholated, camphorous kind of feel, like very old world. Really just feels like a time machine. But I think it's just amazing to lavish on. Folks, I know that this is really expensive. This was kind of a splurge, and somebody was selling it at lower than the retail price, so I splurged on it. But this was originally released, I believe, in the 1910s, and it predates a lot of releases from like Caron and Galland. Some would argue that Fulnana was actually an inspiration for such releases as Le Bleu and Mitsuko, and it's just this incredible stuff. They use the original, what's the word I'm looking for? They use the original composition, the original formula. Thank you very much for saving me there, Rachel. The original formula, and of course there needed to be some tweaks, some adjustments, since the amount necessary in those formulas had needed to change because of restrictions over the past 100 years or so. But I'd be damned if this didn't smell like it was directly from the early 20th century. So that she actually did a write-up of the original vintage in Scent and Subversion. And let me just take a look here. I was scrambling to get little like bookmarks in this, but she writes about Fulnana: soft, musky, animalic, woody, and balsamic with a medicinal and herbal edge. This review of Fulnana, or lovely flower, that's what it's translated to, is for the twilight phase of this over 100-year-old perfume. It actually, according to this, was released in 1891.
Wow.
And it was originally inspired by Indian flowers, touted as a rare marriage of the herb garden with the flower garden. Its rich woods and spice base is prominent to my nose because its top notes have dissipated. This has wonderful top notes. Oh my God. It is just a conflagration of top notes, like just something out of like Edwardian times. Like it's just incredible stuff. So Fulnana from Grossmith, that's my first selection.
Oh, it's so beautiful. That's such a beautiful bottle. I have
it. Is, yeah.
I'm almost out of
I'll try to
bottle. Yeah.
I'll try to show the close up of the Fulnana there. And yeah.
And you're right, JJ. This is one of those revival houses that's real.
Yeah.
It's not fake. It's not a fake story. This is a real revival house where they're really bringing back things, really using the original formulas. It's legitimately the same family.
Legitimate.
And there's for real.
There's few of them out there. Fulnana is Grossmith. Fulnana is one of the releases. Grossmith is one of them. Oritza Legrand. There's some of them out there, and I don't want to badmouth, that were resurrections, but they don't smell like the original formulas. Yeah, we won't badmouth.
Landscape, right? Things were very authentic to things that are more creative. Mm-hmm. All right, so my next one is Gauloise, which is named after French cigarette, very famous French cigarette brand that everyone smoked
Mhm.
when I lived in Paris. This is by Molyneux. 1980 was its release, and it's a rosy, tobacco-y chypre, and it's powdery, very strong fragrance. And Barbara writes, perhaps one of the last perfumes to pay homage to smoking culture, with a bottle that looks like an open pack of cigarettes and juice inside that, reminiscent of the 1930s, perfumes like Scandal was probably made to harmonize with or cover up the smell of cigarette smoke. And it does, like, it is piercing in that way, right? It has that opening
Yeah.
green, sort of like galbanum and aldehyde. Oh, nice!
Yeah.
Yes, that's an awesome bottle.
The monolithic bottle. I know this is out of dumb luck. I got to tell you, like, these ones never come up. So, like, I found this on eBay. Somebody who didn't know what it was selling it for $50.
That's amazing.
And it usually goes, like, for a large 100 mil, I've seen it go for like 300.
Yeah.
But the bottle that you have is a bit more accessible. So I recommend folks try to seek out that bottle because it's a little bit cheaper. But I was just like giddy because I loved the iconic original bottle. This like, this stuff's this is one of my favorites from that time period. And you can totally tell that it is intended to sort of mingle with your surroundings and the cigarette smoke, which was everywhere in 1980? Like, I mean, you had cigarette smoke, you had exhaust fumes, you had a lot for perfume to compete with, and this was able to cut right through it. So that's a great choice. Wonderful. I'm glad that you have some of it. Cool. For my next one, I have by Réveillon Carnet de Bal. And this I learned through Barbara in Scent and Subversion. And Carnet de Bal is a carnal vanilla amber. It's like it starts off so floral and so inviting, and then it just dries into something just like a little bit more lecherous in its nature. It's kind of not that hard to find either. I actually bought this for, I don't know, maybe $20 or $30. So this is one that hasn't been unicorned. It hasn't, there hasn't been much discussion of it. I really need to actually write a review about it because there's something so unusual about this amber that shifts into something that is more animalic than what you would expect under the layers of like florals and vanilla. It's a different juxtaposition from what I'm used to. Beautiful stuff though. That's my choice. Carnet de Bal, Parfum de Toilette version. Got this for $25, $30.
Nice. I've never smelled that, and now I want to. So that looks amazing.
Yeah. I want to open up the bottle. It's not a spray because I've learned to appreciate the splashes. Aldehydes and vanilla. Like, I love that. I love the aldehydes from that time too. Yeah, this is some great stuff. Carnet de Bal from Réveillon. All right, back to you.
Right, so this one is my little bottle of Arpège by Lanvin. And I love how Barbara described, it was her description in the book that actually made me pull the trigger and buy this. So I'll read it really quickly. Arpège is a sensual beauty, slightly corrupted at the end of the night by dining and dancing in stilettos, silk, and furs. And it really does have this real fur coat aspect. Those of you that have maybe been who are old enough or been around long enough to remember when people wore real fur coat like out a lot. This truly has a real fur coat aspect to it, this fragrance. The flowers are wilting on the table, sitting next to the fur coat that has absorbed post-dinner cigarette smoke. This peach-led floral is enriched and fattened and rounded by ambrine, the primary molecule in ambergris, and its contrast of fresh peach and an erotic base make Arpège a classic vintage fragrance that nods both to the good girl and the bad. And so it's a very, like, Barbara, right, this fragrance? It's really cool.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And that's a good version, the one that you have. That was That is a good. That's the same. I think that's the same version that I have. Well, for a time period, it was in that bottle, and it's not the opaque black bottle. I think the one I have is from the late 80s, early 90s, and it looks exactly like that. So that's the one to go for, folks. If you want to smell like a good version of arpege that maybe hasn't turned or maybe is too expensive, that's the sweet spot right there. So yeah, let's go seek that one out if you don't already have it, and you would like to experience arpege. Mine is this little spray version of the Eau de Toilette Hyoscée from Guy Laroche. And I'll put myself right here. This is very cool. I remember reading somebody's review and they said it looks just like a lipstick container, the bottle. I actually think these bottles were used for a number of different fragrances. They're just sort of like the generic bottle that fragrance brands would use for like their small bottle versions. But I thought it was funny that they mentioned that it looked like a lipstick. And there is sort of like this lipstick orris that's in it. That's pretty remarkable. Like I didn't really expect it to really be that forward in a 70s fragrance. Just great, spicy, ambery kind of stuff. Sort of like maybe sort of a harbinger of what we would find with opium or cinnabar. But with this, there's still sort of that holdover of the early 70s kind of, greens and herbs and galbanum and stuff. But the way that it transitions is really cool. I actually do want to read. I just want to read what Barbara states in her book on Hyoscée, which I thought was really impressive. Opulent, mysterious, and restrained Hyoscée, I dared, in quotes. That's what it means, I dared. Takes a while to get to know, unlike many scents in today's crowded marketplace that rush at you with their olfactory elevator pitches in one spritz, desperate to tell you in one breath what they're all about. Hyoscée makes you sit a spell to figure it out. Speaking of spells, Hyoscée casts a beautiful one after a rather unpleasant and unpromising opening of harsh aldehydes. Yeah, wait for them sometimes. If the aldehydes are too much, just give it a minute. You're not going to stick around at that, at that level for too long. Hyoscée leads you to dark woods. The dryness of vetiver woods and patchouli are met with the creamy, lush warmth of amber, aluminum, and benzoin. It's so inky dark in that Hyoscée forest that your nose has to adjust to the subtle gradations of the chords and notes, like stepping into a dark, seemingly empty room and having to adjust your eyes to see the furniture. Once you're fully under its spell and accept its inky atmosphere, the vegetation in its lush forest shows itself, a flash of white jasmine and deep rose, the dusky leafiness of coriander. And she mentioned coriander was one of her favorite notes earlier. The restraint of scents exuded in the cold dawn, a bracing mix of beautiful things holding back. Sticking with Hyoscée's temporality and style, though, pays back big time. The dry down blooms with the creamiest jasmine and rose touched by powdery orris. You can see with this fragrance that even as late as the 1970s, perfumers were still allowed to play with time, to actually take their sweet time. It's a great loss that this happens less. And those are some of my favorite perfumes, that you just stay present with them and watch and smell them develop. And this is a prime example of that. Hard to obtain. I know I keep saying this, like I hate, like what am I doing? Like I'm making people feel FOMO so badly. But this was actually it was kept in production, if I'm not mistaken, but not by the Guy Laroche brand, by some other producer. And I can't speak to how that one smells, so I can't say if that's the same or worse or even better. But I found this actually in an antique shop. I score with antique shops around here. I don't know. I just have that luck that in the Cape, and this was like $20.
That's awesome.
And it smells gorgeous. It does. I'm going to actually do like a more thoughtful review of my own, but After reading Barbara's interpretation of it, I feel like that's a hard act to follow, but I'll try to articulate in my own words how I feel about this as I wear it. So that's High Jose from Guy Laroche. I think this is 1976, 1977.
Oh man, I look forward to it. I've never even heard of that fragrance.
Yeah.
I really look forward to your thoughts on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the lesser known Guy Laroche. I mean, we all know, like Fiji and then of course, like Guy Laroche is famous for Drakkar Noir, but they had some other releases that are not currently being produced or being produced by some other business or company. But that one's a great one. We have in the chat here, Beauty of Scent. JJ Colborn, have you tried Tom Ford Italian Cypress? Yes, I remember Italian Cypress, and it kind of reminded me of Halston Z14. I remember that. And I thought to myself, well, this is quite lovely, but there's really no sense in having this for however much money when there's lovely Halston Z14. High Jose is phenomenal. Yeah. And there's a baby there. That's right. I remember reading about that. There's a baby High Jose as well, which I presume was meant for little babies, or baby smelling. I don't. A line on beauty. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? Because I would see it come up, but I never got around to reading more about it. Was it actually marketed to babies, or was it supposed to be like a baby fresh version of it? Tell us a little bit more about it. Rachel, let's move on to your next one.
The one thing I love about Barbara's book, Scent and Subversion, is that it goes on some deep dives into some of those like the early vintage, like 20s, 30s, some early Coty fragrances, which I personally love, and I'm always looking for, and which not a lot of people are, even though I think they're great and more people should be looking for them. And so one that I love is Limon, and the translation is like it's kind of like a double entendre. Like a magnet, like attraction of a magnet, or literally loving her or being in love with her, right? You can translate it both ways, but here's my little vintage bottle. This is one of them. I have a couple little ones. And she writes, the powderiness of Limon is saved from being too old-fashioned by the round, buttery, and sensual dark fruit and balsamic notes that underlie the perfume, like bright oil colors on a dark velvet canvas. This is the coolest part. Jacques Guerlain's wife loved Limon so much, it is said that she even preferred it to her husband's perfume. And that's that kind of old story of Jacques Guerlain's wife preferring Coty fragrances, and that pissed him off so much. Wanting to do better versions of them.
Right.
The book is like the coolest thing ever, I think.
I know.
So yeah, this is my little Limon.
How cute. And folks out there, if you can't spend the kind of money for certain vintages, the thing about Coty is Coty was so widely produced and such a juggernaut in the perfume world that you can still get antique vintage bottles for a lot less than maybe a lot of these other fragrances that get a lot of hype and attention. And like Le Mans and L'Origan and like Muguet de Bois. There's a few of them that are just fantastic. And we are also, there's some that are a little bit more difficult to get, but like the wonderful sticks as well. Yeah. Did you learn of sticks from Barbara, or did you learn of that independently? Or I know I just noticed she had. Yeah.
I'm sure it's in here. I wouldn't be surprised.
It is. I saw it. And I was like, oh, that reminds me of Rachel.
I'm sure I read about it in here then. It must be.
Yeah. Coty is a house that is worth rediscovering for those who love their vintages. They're not talked about enough, and it's a shame. It's a shame because they were up there with with Guerlain and the like. And obviously they were favored by some over the Guerlains. So those were the last of mine here. Feel free if you have more to share with us.
Well, I have a couple more, and then if you don't mind, I might cut out 5 minutes early. I actually have a doctor's appointment right after this, so I might leave at like 1:55 if you don't mind.
That's fine, and we can sign off at that time, so it'll work out perfectly.
Okay, cool, awesome. So I had two more bottles. One is
great.
YSL's Y, and the female version, because there's a male version, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, JJ, but there's a female version and a male version, and this is the female version. And then 1964, and Barbara writes, like summer in a bottle, Yves Saint Laurent's first fragrance, Y, is a light-hearted chypre. Its sunny disposition goes along with the traditional intelligence, good taste, and gravitas most chypres convey. It opens with galbanum and honeysuckle, singing the highest notes as peach and honey smooth their edges with warm sweetness. The honey is particularly intense and signals the unexpected animalic nature of Y, providing volume and depth to the flowers and fruit. Basically, and then she goes on to write a lot more beautiful words about it, but it's really, I mean, like, I know people don't like today's Y, but this Y is like, I love.
Yeah, let's go back to you so you can bring up yours. Hi. Oh, no, close
Sorry.
up. No, that's me. I'm in charge of all those controls. Nice. And which version is that one? Is that the Eau de Parfum, or?
Let me see. This is the Eau de Parfum. This is the Eau de
Cool.
Parfum.
And I have the lovely, light and lovely Eau de Toilette. It's just radiant.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Radiant is the right word. Yeah.
Yeah, it is radiance for sure. Radiance in the bottle. It just feels so sunny and radiant and green, and the greens and golds are what come up in my head. Golds and greens for sure.
Yes. Yes. And then I have, open up the page real quick. Another vial perfume. I've just grabbed Antelope.
Ooh.
Again, I just discovered the house of vial. I don't speak German. I'm sorry. Through Barbara and through this book. And this is a 1945 fragrance. I'll take out the bottle. You'd think that a perfume called Antelope would be a little more, gamey or animalic, but Antelope by Vial lives up more to the habitats of the antelope than to the animal the name evokes. One gets the sense that the leaves, the woods, and the flowers that went into Antelope have dried into a hay-like concentration whose scent is stirred into recognition by a hot sun or brief summer wind. I imagine a sleeping animal on a bed of herbs, dried grass with flowers in the distance. In some, it's dry, sweet, and woody. And that is exactly what it's like. Dry, sweet, woody. It's gorgeous. Gorgeous, right? Yeah.
I love these caps. This is a cap of the bottle that I have that has sort of like that tortoise shell. I love it. Yeah.
And is yours Eau de Parfum?
This one is the Parfum de Toilette. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Mine is, I think, the later version, Eau de Parfum, later than yours, but it's still beautiful.
Yeah, no, the newer versions are great. Did you get yours from Anouge?
I got mine from Anouge.
Yes.
Yeah.
I happen to get. Wait, do you have? So you're showing Antelope, right? Okay, I want to make sure because I also have Zibeline. Zibeline I got from Anouge. I think the Antelope I got elsewhere, but I did get Zibeline, which is another great one
I got Zibeline from him too.
Yes, Parfums Whale. Another house that isn't discussed very much that had much success in the perfume world in the 30s and 40s. These are two classics, Zibeline and this one, Antelope. Lovely.
Wonderful.
Nice. Yeah, well, that's actually one. That happens to be one that we both were inspired by Barbara.
Awesome.
Yeah, her right up on that. Actually, she encouraged me to seek out Antelope and Zibeline. So wonderful. Okay, well, why don't we wrap things up? I'm going to get the theme music going on here, and both of us are still working on getting a guest in about 2 weeks. So just be on, just stay tuned.
It'll be a surprise.
It'll be a surprise in 2 weeks. I'm debating whether or not to do a separate kind of stream next week, which may be a first impression stream. Rachel, I'm actually interested in doing a first impression stream on the tea brand that you sent me, the samples of the tea brand.
Cool. Yeah.
So I may do that next week. But we'll look at the chat really quickly, see if anybody else has chimed in. Thank you very much, Duncan. Cheers to you as well. And this has been a wonderful episode. I'm so glad that Barbara was willing to join us for a conversation.
Cool.
This is obviously going to be archived. If you've missed most of it, just check out the live tap on my YouTube channel page. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Please click like on this stream. That is a habit that I haven't developed. I have to get used to asking people to thumbs up, give it a like. If you liked this, hit the bell button to receive notifications because there's going to be a lot of great stuff coming up this autumn. I'm going to be going back to videos, and we're going to have a lot of great stuff coming up for Effluvium with Rachel, my co-host. So until next time, please be well and take care. We'll talk to you soon. All right. Bye-bye.